All right, Dr. Bob. So welcome, welcome to Tulsa. We are so excited to talk to you, and I hope that you received my questions in advance, so it gave you a little bit of forewarning about.
I have them right here.
Wonderful. So the group submitted some of those questions, and then I submitted some other ones too that I hope will be helpful for all of us as we seek to integrate faith and the presence of Christ into the various healing missions that we're doing here in Tulsa. So thank you so much.
Yeah, great. I'm excited to hear and see what you guys are doing.
Would you like, when you answer the questions, would you like to read them, or are there certain questions that you thought were more important that you would like to start with, or?
Why don't you read them and then I'll respond to them.
Okay, wonderful. Do that. Let me grab my copy here.
Yeah.
I'll head back this way. Okay, so our first question has to do with integrating faith and what we've been learning in healing the whole person into mental health practice. So there's several different aspects of this question. But since you have it printed there, hopefully you'll follow okay. But how can Catholic mental health professionals integrate aspects of the faith into their practice in a secular environment? For example, how would I integrate faith with patients who have not identified spiritual growth as a therapeutic goal, or with those who have not identified as religious, or with those who are religious, but they're not Catholic?
So the short answer is abide, right? Which is just stay in a posture of receptivity to the Holy Spirit and let the Holy Spirit lead. So that's the short answer. But let me get a lot of different aspects of the question. So one is I remember going to visit a community in Germany where there was almost no faith around them, and they were struggling with how do we relate to people from our faith without imposing the faith. And so that's what I thought of when you asked the question. And as a therapist, there's always that level of respect, and as a prayer minister, everything, there's a level of respect for the dignity and the freedom of the other person. And so it's the difference between proselytizing and evangelization. Like your presence, if you carry Christ with you, the reading today was, John 15 at Mass, and it was remain in me as I remain in you, right? And you will bear much fruit. And so the key is not so much what gets communicated directly about the faith to the person in front of you or the people in front of you. What's important is how you carry it. And so for people without faith, you become the image of Christ to them just by you being in relation to them, to him. And and so sometimes he opens doors with people immediately as you're doing the initial interview. You know, tell me about yourself. What are your belief systems? All that. And sometimes somebody that doesn't have faith, you can hear hunger there that you can explore. And others, you can feel a wall there, that there's a wound or a resistance or a lack of any context. And so I think it's just a matter of being sensitive to what that is. Uh, but every single person longs to trust love. That's a universal. The Catechism says everybody has the desire for God is written in every human heart. And so it's with a lot of people, it's an excavation project of getting to the places of the heart that have become barricaded off and have lost trust and have lost faith. And I can remember early on I was seeing a lot of people who either had another faith or didn't have faith. And almost always when you got deeper into their story, like women, those of you with the Grief to Grace and the ministry to women with abortions, the almost always when somebody got down to the deep places of their heart where there's an abortion, there's a knowledge of the wound and a sense of guilt and shame and a desire for God's freedom and forgiveness, right? But sometimes it's 2 years into the process. And it's just being patient with the person. You know, in some situations like Catholic Charities, you probably don't have 2 years to walk with somebody, or in a clinic. In other places you do, but it's just being patient with people where they are, and you're constantly reminded of their desire for God that's written into their heart, which is their desire for love and to be able to trust love. Now, there are some situations, like I don't know if some of you have listened to our podcast, but we did a podcast with Carl Lehman, who's the one who developed the Emmanuel process. And he talks about this young person who came in who was suicidal, who had no faith. And he just told him the way that he prayed with people and asked him if he'd be open. And he said yes. And he had a life-changing encounter with Jesus just through that experience in that. So there are times when you don't close the door just out of a false sense of respect for the person's lack of faith. That's where the sensitivity to the Holy Spirit's important. But realize that all the principles that we've talked about are all true. I mean, truth is truth. So all the principles we talk about in the healing the whole person, even if God's name was never mentioned, would still be true. Right? And you could lead people in that process and ask them questions instead of prayer. You can ask them questions like, once they get down to the wounds, just are you just open to be quiet and to see where this pain is coming from, right? And you're praying, but you're not asking them to pray. And then as they have this enlightenment of a place of their woundedness, you just ask them to describe what they're experiencing and what they believe and anything there. So that part of the process is similar. And again, the Holy Spirit's there because you're there. So your questions are being led by the Holy Spirit. The person is encountering the Holy Spirit by your questions. And then rather than pray and say, are you open for Jesus to come? You just say, who in your life loved you the most? Like, where did you feel the most safe? Where did you experience the greatest sense of just being able to be yourself and knowing that you're going to be cared for and protected? Something like that. And then in the process of that, you say, okay, would you be open in your imagination? And again, you're praying, but in your imagination, can you imagine this person being present with you there in that situation? Now, it's not the same as a direct prayer, but you're moving the person's heart in the direction of openness there. So I would say largely that's how I would answer. But when you're in a posture of just abiding and paying attention to inspirations, you're going to just see doors open with people that didn't have doors open before, just because of your docility to the Spirit. I started out in a practice that was secular. I saw people of every denomination, including Catholics, but I saw a lot of unbelievers. But after 2 years in my practice, and I was praying with people, I couldn't meet enough people who are hungry to be prayed with. Like it was just constant. That's why they came. They heard about other people's encounters and they just wanted it for themselves. So recognize that it also could be a transition. Now, if you're in a secular agency that doesn't permit you to pray, that's a different matter. But for most people in private practice, and I notice there's another question here, but for most people in private practice, unless the state laws directly forbid it's perfectly okay to bring your faith and your spirituality into it when the other person's open to it. Okay, so let me stop there. I know that's a long answer to a question, but
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Um, Here's another question, and it follows well, I think, on the answer that you just gave. Are there any potential ethical pitfalls of limiting one's practice to a Christ-centered approach? And by that is, are there pitfalls with licensing boards or insurance?
yeah. What's so interesting is conferences, I mean, licensing boards have no difficulty with people bringing all kind of weird spiritualities into it,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And so if that's permissible, then bringing authentic Catholic Christian spirituality is permissible. That doesn't mean that you can't get opposition from it. And again, I think it depending on the local licensing board. I would imagine that Oklahoma would be a little more open than, say, New York City, New York State, or something like that, just because it's more of the Bible Belt. Tallahassee, Florida is more open in that sense. Um, so I think you just need to know the state laws related to that and the insurance laws. I didn't take insurance personally. I had people file for themselves. So I stayed clear of being controlled by insurance companies uh, in my practice, just so that I had the freedom to do that. And people that needed to, I could just sign a general diagnosis for them and they could submit. And so, many of them were able to receive insurance. Um, so I think here's the place that I came to peace with the whole picture. Christian ethics are greater than any secular ethics. If I'm living in a Christian ethic, I'm going beyond the law, the local law, because all the local ethics are, unless they're oppressive in any way, all the local laws and ethics professionally are to protect the dignity of the client and the freedom of the client and make sure there's no violation or abuse or misuse. And so if we're respecting their freedom and their dignity and we're loving them with Christian love, then there's no violation of ethics or law.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Uh, Another therapy question. Are there particular therapies or therapy models, such as parts work, for example, that are particularly easy to integrate with the Catholic faith? And how so?
Yeah, I think again, most of the modalities are started by people who don't start from a place of faith. And so, for example, in parts work, internal family systems, if you read the books on that, there's some occult stuff there that you have to steer clear from. But again, truth is truth. And so whatever's true in parts work or EMDR or cognitive behavior therapy or anything else, whatever's true in them integrates very easily and very nicely into the Catholic faith and practice and inner healing work. And so you can see elements. Uh, there are people, they're in Dallas actually, uh, who did a workshop for the Catholic Therapy Association, and they took all these other modalities and they showed how they were all pieces of the inner healing process. Uh, and so that they very easily fit. And then Carl Lehman, the one I mentioned before, is a psychiatrist, Christian psychiatrist in Chicago area. And he has a website called kclehman.com, Lehman. It has an incredible amount of information, including his own personal testimonies. But he's done research on all the different modalities and how they're related to inner healing prayer and how inner healing prayer has actually performed better than the modalities. But the modalities have often increased the effectiveness of the healing prayer.
Wow, that's wonderful. And actually, I'm going to skip forward a little bit in the list because what you mentioned fits really well with our fourth question. What resources could you recommend that would support Catholic counselors who want to offer services based in Christian anthropology and morality? So you just gave us a wonderful one there, but are there others that you would recommend?
Well, I think you've given me a lot of them, which is Unbound and Encounter and uh, Healing the Whole Person. There's all of those are part of that. There's a book coming out. I don't know if you're familiar with Bria Hannon. You're familiar with who Bria Hannon is?
I'm not.
Okay. Bria Hannon wrote a book called Befriending Your Inner Child, and it's a
Oh.
Catholic approach to uh, inner healing. We've had her on our podcast. In fact, we've done a whole series on our podcast from therapists, Restore the Glory podcast, and all of those would be helpful for people who are in the field. Um, Bria was one of them. And then other people who do parts work. Uh, I'm just blanking on their name right now, but the what's the name of their ministry is uh, something Hearts. Um, I know them both. Uh, Jerry Crete wrote a book.
Litany of the Heart,
Yeah,
Litanies of the Heart. Okay.
yeah, Litanies of the Heart, and then his partner in the ministry. I don't know, but they have a lot of good resources on their website. Um, let's see, we do a couple times. We do about once a year. We do therapists and and healing professionals virtual conferences. We'll have Bria on this year with Sister Miriam and Christopher Lafitte. Uh, that'll be a good resource for people. Um, let's see what else. You'd think I would have thought more about this since the question was there, but uh,
That's it.
um, there are a lot of good books on, which getting into question three, but there's a lot of good books on Christian marriage, uh, with marriage difficulties. Um, yeah, I'm just drawing a blank, but there's a lot more.
Thank you. Well, you already pointed us in a great direction. And of course, we have your footnotes and Healing the Whole Person and the
Yeah,
workbook that
and
points out a lot of resources right there.
yeah, there's a lot of resources. Some of them Catholic, some of them other Christian backgrounds. But again, all we integrated there was whatever's compatible with the Catholic faith.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, well, our third question, and I'm going to put a little bit of a caveat on this one because the last class that we offered, Healing the Whole Person, in the exit survey, I asked people whether the course had significantly and positively impact a key relationship in their life. And we got a lot of yeses. So just having that in mind, the Healing the Whole Person does positively impact current relationships, but that being the case, I've also noticed this other aspect. So this question goes like this. So healing the whole person seems to be tremendously powerful in helping people find freedom from adverse experiences in the past. However, those who approach the program with an ongoing situation, a difficult marriage, trouble with family members, etc., find it somewhat less helpful. Can you comment on this observation and what would you recommend?
Yeah, without knowing particular situations, I can see where people who are in a lot of turmoil and are going through this have difficulty feeling safe enough to allow the process. You know, if like if there's not a safe environment emotionally, the community can be a safe environment, but then you go home to an unsafe environment. It's hard to let down the guards and enter into the healing process. So that would be an acknowledgement of what they're sharing. On the other hand, every marriage issue at some level is two people's brokenness that keeps clashing with each other. And if the one person can heal so that they're not as reactive to the wounds that have roots in childhood and are being manifested in their present, uh, they'll have more objectivity and less reactivity. And then they'll be able to return good for evil, love for the lack of love. They'll be able to establish healthy boundaries in the relationship. So all the patterns of health will increase if they're safe enough to do the work. And so it actually can be extremely helpful, even in really bad situations. Uh, somebody may have the capacity to separate, which they didn't before because of a codependency, if it's a real abusive situation. Somebody else may have the capacity uh, to forgive that they haven't been able to forgive before and continue the process of forgiveness for repeated things. So there's all the principles are there and applicable to our relationships. And it's just a matter of feeling safe enough to do the work.
Thank you very much. Um, has shifting to a different type of ministry. So has healing the whole person been taken into prison ministry? We have some people in our community that are interested in doing this. If it has, then we'd love to learn from others' experience. What would be your concerns about bringing healing the whole person into the prisons? And what kind of support would you recommend in that setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I saw that, I was excited about the desire to do that. Just right before earlier this week, I had somebody sharing with me that they're going to bring this into the prisons. And I've been desiring for a long time for some part of this to be brought into the prison ministry. However, I have a guy that was in our parish that I went to visit in the prison, and I had met with him before he went to prison, and he was open to the process. And then once he got in prison, he closed down, and he said, "It's just not safe for me to be vulnerable here." Uh, so that kind of gives me a level of pause that I didn't have before about, the question is a good question, when and how do you implement that? Um, I've been involved in prison ministry in a couple different ways. One was putting Kairos retreats on in prison ministries, also working with people as they're coming out of prison, and then visiting people individually in prison. And um, everyone needs healing. I mean, it's it's a universal need, but it's a particular need for those who are in prison. And when they can begin to walk through to get to the roots of whatever brought them to prison and begin to heal that, it gives so much encouragement. The question is, and I don't have an answer for this. I think this is those of you who are doing prison ministry need to explore this and let us all know, um, is what can create a safe environment for them. Uh, will one-on-one ministry work? Will a group teaching, like a group video, create that environment? I don't know the answer to that. And I'd really like to see it happen, but I have a deep desire because I'm no longer able to do prison ministry, but my hope is that there'll be people who have that calling can bring that into the prisons.
We're going to turn to the I Am prayer ministry training that you offer in Florida. So I went last year. I was very impressed. I loved it and tried to bring some of it back to the team with um, staying close to the Holy Spirit, leaning on Him while we're running our classes and the Telsums are going down. But I wanted to give you a chance to speak a little bit about the training. How would you describe the I Am prayer ministry training that you provide at the John Paul II Healing Center? Is it necessary for the person, and then some questions about the prayer ministry itself. Is it necessary for a person receiving this prayer ministry to be in a state of grace? So this was a question posed to me. Is there a danger of a person unintentionally fabricating events or experiences in the process of recovering and healing memories? So
Okay.
that was a concern that was voiced to me about it, but so I wanted
Okay.
to
Yeah, those
see
are really three different questions with three.
questions. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right, but let me just take them one at a time. They're all
Okay.
good questions. Um, so the I Am prayer ministry that you went to last year, we had about 5 or 6 satellites when you were there. Now we have like 18 or 20, uh, which I'm saying that because it's possible that Tulsa could be a satellite center these years. What we require is people that have gone through I Am who can facilitate the process, and it's live. So we have people from Australia, Spain, Croatia, 4 in Mexico, 1 in um, Colombia, 1 in Chile, and then 5 in the United States going through this time. So it's so exciting just to see the communities that are developing these healing communities. And it would be a really good next step after you have people who have gone through the healing whole person and a few people who've gone through I Am, because then you can facilitate it. And what I Am is, it's an acronym for, it's the name of God, And so it's an emphasis on God doing the work rather than us. But it's a acronym for inspiration, abiding, and movements. And so we're not teaching a method of prayer ministry as much as we're teaching a posture of prayer ministry. So how do we stay in a posture of abiding, that is uh, resting in the vine? Like, one of the quotes we have there is Jesus saying, "It's not I who does the work, it's the Father in me who is working through me." And so it's that vine and the branches. How do we allow God to work through us rather than feel like we've got to do the work? And to do that, we need to rely on the inspirations of the Holy Spirit and to be able to discern the movements of the heart, our heart, the movements of the Holy Spirit, the movements of the heart of the person in front of us. So all the techniques that we teach are around that framework. And so I teach in the mornings and we do a demonstration in the mornings and then practice. And then in the afternoons, my brother Bart teaches in the afternoon. There's a demonstration and a practice. And so we move from very simple prayer at the beginning of the week to very deeper, complex prayer at the end of the week, including physical healing prayer. Uh, so I really recommend it because it's a way to continue your healing because we ask you to be in triads. Are you continuing in a triad?
No, I wish. I never got connected. I was the only one to go from Tulsa, and so I got back and I never got connected to people electronically. So I'm hoping to be able to pick up and
Okay, yeah. So we have people in triads, which is in threes all week practicing, and then we encourage people to to develop that 10 times being the receiver, 10 times being the intercessor, and 10 times being the facilitator, which then gives practice, but it also brings further healing. So you form a community that becomes a healing community, and you're receiving healing and practice all at the same time. And then from there, then that opens up into a community. So all these communities that we're doing the I am in, people have come to I am, have gone back, have done their 10-10-10s, and then have gone back and formed communities through the Healing the Whole Person videos. And now the communities are just growing, and now there's a whole lot of people. One of my formation pieces uh, was something called Tallahassee Healing Prayer Ministries, and we had an interdenominational prayer ministries. We had some once a month in a Catholic church, once a month in another Christian church, and we probably had 50, 60 people that were on our prayer ministry teams, and people could come twice a month just to get prayer from this community. And the my partner in that was a guy by the name of Andy Miller, Bishop Andy Miller now, but he's an Anglican bishop. But he teaches HeartSync. I'm not sure if you're familiar with HeartSync. It's another resource. But HeartSync he's doing that all over the world. So is that sufficient for the first question?
yes, thank you.
Okay. So the second question was, is it necessary for the person receiving prayer ministry to be in a state of grace? No. It's pretty important that the person doing the prayer ministry is in a state of grace. Uh, Otherwise, it's hard to abide and be in the inspirations, but it's not necessary for the person who's receiving. In fact, the story that I told about Carl Lehman, the guy was not in a state of grace and he had a powerful encounter with Jesus. And I've seen wherever people are uh, in the process, obviously being in a state of grace helps the openness, but God can do anything. You think about all the gospel stories with Jesus, where how many of the people that Jesus healed were in a state of grace? Probably not many, if any, right? So we just meet people where they are. Then the third question was, is there a danger of a person unintentionally fabricating events? Yeah, and those of you who've been through training in psychology, there's something called false memory syndrome, and here's where the issue is. I think the false memory syndrome movement was an attack against therapy, and most of it was motivated by parents who had abused their children, who went to court and got lawyers to prove that you couldn't prove the memories. So I think that the movement itself was not a very healthy movement from my observation. That being said, there is a possibility of having a memory and an accusation in a memory without it being validated. And so what I have done as a therapist and then also in prayer ministry is I never conclude with a person that a memory is an actual memory that's valid. I want them to come to know it and trust it and have validation for it. Right. So if somebody says I might have been sexually abused, I'm not going to assume that they've been sexually abused. I'm going to listen and create enough safety so that they can explore it internally with the Holy Spirit. And over time, there are manifestations as they're going through those memories that tell you whether it's fabricated or not. That's with serious abuse issues. With other issues, like you're praying and you're brought back to a memory, well, the proof is in the pudding. The fruit is in what happens, right? And so if somebody goes back to a memory, and whether or not it's totally accurate or not, but they have a belief system in the memory, and in that memory, Jesus meets them and brings freedom. And now they have compassion for the person who hurt them. Now they have freedom of heart. Now they're experiencing joy and peace. I don't care if all the details were accurate, right? It doesn't really matter to me. It may matter to them for them to find out how much is accurate, but it doesn't matter whether all the details are accurate or not. What's the matter is that they're freed from something they've been carrying unconsciously and consciously in a belief system and in judgments and inner vows and everything else. And if they can be freed at that level, then they're free to explore that memory if they want to. But usually the memory becomes a non-issue once the healing has taken place. And there are some memories that are so deep and the trauma is so much that it's a continual movement uh, to uncover the depths of the pain and the depths of the memory. So it's not an easy or quick healing. It's a long-term process of healing.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. And then here's a spiritual question that comes from our team. I have attended Healing the Whole Person, journaled and prayed the prayers, but I still have a block as far as hearing God's message to me. I don't seem to hear God's words for me. Any suggestions for opening a conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have struggled with that personally. I think we hear differently. Sometimes we have expectations of how somebody else's hears from God. And this is part of what Bart teaches in the uh, hearing from God section of I Am Prayer Ministry. Uh, one of the things he does is he has people renounce the lie that I don't hear from God. That's one block. Uh, and then secondly, he helps people identify how they hear from God typically. So for example, Bart and I are very different in the way we hear from God. Uh, Bart will get images, and as he tests them out, uh, you know, as he tests them, they'll have a sense that God's speaking there. I get either senses, intuitions, or words. And it's more when I'm ministering to somebody else. But when I'm being prayed for, I feel blocked in that sometimes. When I get to certain places, I just feel blocked in that capacity. Uh, and so I, to this day, don't know where some of those blocks come from, even though I've been steeped in this ministry all these years. Uh, and in God's providence, I just have to surrender that. Now, in prayer, I've had images, and in prayer, I've had words, and in prayer, I've had scriptures come. There are things, but there are times when I don't hear or don't receive, and I don't know what to do with it other than just to surrender to that. But the reason why we go through the barrier section of that inner healing prayer, you're familiar with the inner healing prayer that we have in the workbook, the step by step? The barrier section is really important there to be able to discern, okay, if I'm not receiving anything from Jesus, Holy Spirit, please reveal to me if there's any blocks here, if there's any places where there's an impediment. And then there may be unforgiveness, there may be dissociation, there may be shame, there may be abandonment that believes that God's not there for me. There may be any number of things that are in the way. And uh, so it's just a matter of discerning at that point. And somebody who's skilled as a facilitator won't put the burden on you to hear. They'll continue to explore with you. Okay, if you're having trouble hearing, let's pay attention to that. What do you experience when you have trouble hearing? What do you believe in that moment where you're having trouble hearing Jesus? And then we'll pray with that. Okay, and then we may do renouncing prayer, or we may just sit and wait and be quiet, and or we may say, okay, was there a flicker of an insight that came to you right as we started the prayer that you dismissed because it didn't seem important enough? So there's all kind of ways as facilitators that we can work with and intercessors that we can work with that when somebody's having trouble receiving.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bob. I see that we have a few minutes left. I don't know if
How about I give an example
yeah, thank you.
of what I just shared there?
Sure.
This is kind of a remarkable situation, but we were down doing training for Steubenville conferences, all the prayer ministers and chaperones. And at the end of those, at that time, we would have prayer teams in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and we would just pray for everybody. So it was one of the rare times that Bart and I were teamed up together. Usually he'd be on one team, I'd be on another team. We were teamed up together. And this woman had come who the year before had brought her older daughter, and the older daughter had experienced tremendous healing. And the year before that, a neighbor who had 8 different diagnoses and 8 different medications, who had never been able to leave his house and couldn't had to drop out of college, he had such a dramatic healing that he got freed from all the medications back in school. So this woman's faith was through the roof. Like 2 years in a row, she just saw these miracles of healing. And so she came up with her daughter who had scoliosis. And she was asking us to pray for scoliosis. And up to this point, again, you pay attention to movements. How is the Holy Spirit moving? What's happening? And so we're praying. And everybody before that, the Holy Spirit was just moving very powerfully. And then when we started to pray for this girl, and Bart had his hand on her back, and I was praying from the front, and the mother was over here, it just felt like there was this complete stop, like no more movement of the Spirit. It was just like this incredible barrier. And so we stopped and said, Lord, what's the barrier here? And I got a word, and Bart had a picture, but Bart didn't trust his picture, and I didn't know what my word meant. So I said to them, the only thing I'm hearing is generational. There's something generational. And the mother said, well, that's interesting. As adults, both my mother and I developed scoliosis as adults, which is really rare. And I said, but I don't know how to pray for that. And so Bart wasn't sharing. And I said, how about you both go sit down and go to adoration and ask the Lord what he wants to show you, and then come on back up. And Bart says, well, before you do, I just have this silly picture. That's Bart often talks about these silly pictures. He says, I just have this silly image in my mind, but I don't feel like it fits you, the girl. And he said, I see a father chasing his daughter around the house, screaming with a shoe, threatening to hit her. And the mom says, no, that's not her. And the girl said, no, that's not me. And Bart says, yeah, I had a feeling it wasn't you. And then all of a sudden the mother burst into tears. And she says, that's my mother, that's my father, and that's me. all of a sudden it connected. The picture and the word generational, and the mother and the grandmother getting scoliosis as adults. And so we started to pray inner healing prayer for the mother around that memory. And as Jesus comes to the little girl in that memory and wraps his arms around her and shows his compassion and heals her, she's able to forgive her father for the abuse. And at that moment that she spoke the words of forgiveness, both the girl and Bart Fall felt her back shift like 20 degrees from the scoliosis that was 40 degrees to 20 degrees. It was like this immediate shift in her back from that prayer, which there's so many things in that caught my attention. One is the generational inheritance of emotional, physical, spiritual pain and suffering. Secondly, what happens when there are barriers? We don't always understand what the barriers are, but if we'll keep listening and keep trusting what the Lord's revealing, then it'll come open. But third is how our spiritual and our physical symptoms are interconnected like that. It's just amazing to me. So that's an example of what do you do when you can't hear?
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bob. I don't know if anybody has, if you have time for one question, if someone has one
Sure.
that they didn't
Yeah,
ask.
sure.
So I'd like to open it, just give anyone a chance. They're all like.
Dr. Bob, I work a lot with couples, and I know you've mentioned with marriage, working with marriages, if one person does have healing and they can be kind of grounded for the other person to facilitate theirs. What if you do have to come in, you're working with a couple? Can you apply this, or how do you apply this, or do you just go a different route?
Yeah, I was a marriage and family therapist, and I loved working with couples and applying this process with couples. And we would be in the middle of a unresolvable conflict, like they were just going over and over again. And I would hear the same reactions and the same beliefs and the same judgments. And so I learned after I learned to do this kind of prayer, I learned to stop them in the middle of the dynamic and just say, could we just pray with what's going on with you right now? And I would just start with whoever was in more distress at that moment and just allow the Holy Spirit to lead. And I would just ask, are you okay if your husband or wife is here and is praying for you in this situation? And always they'd say yes. I don't ever remember somebody saying no. And so we just go with, okay, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling right now? What are you believing about yourself? What are the judgments you have towards your husband or your wife? Okay. Can we ask the Holy Spirit to show you where this might be rooted? And they may have memories related to the marriage that go back to some other point in the marriage where it started, but they also may have memories that go back to childhood or teenage years or a previous relationship. And so when we would pray through that and they would get freedom, all of a sudden they had a capacity to see their spouse differently and recognize that they were caught up in this trauma that was blinding them in effect to being able to hear their spouse or see it. And so it gave the spouse a tremendous amount of compassion for their other spouse to be able to see where this is coming from and not take it personally, but say, oh, now I can understand why you're reacting that way and I can love you there. So I found it very, very helpful. My book, Be Devoted, I have a section in one of the chapters on this, on applying it in marriage.
Well, Dr. Bob, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Good to meet you all. I'm excited about what you're doing. Thank you for shepherding this and for just all the different ministries that you're involved in. It just has such a great impact in the community. So thank you.
Well, we're very happy to be a part of what God's doing, and we're grateful for you and what He's done for you and through you, and we keep you in our prayer of gratitude, and that He continues to bless you.
Please,
Yeah.
if you would keep us in prayer for this next week with the IM and all the satellites and everything, we would be grateful for that.
We definitely will. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless you all. Thank you.
Bye.